4 years. That's how long it had been since I last saw him. Since the day I walked out of our home. His home really, with his brother, the man I had chosen over him. I didn't regret it then, and honestly I didn't regret it now. I had done what I wanted. I had chased what made me happy. And as far as I was concerned, life had gone exactly the way it was supposed to. But today, standing in the living room of my former father-in-law's house, watching the clock tick away the seconds until he walked through that door, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not guilt, of course, never guilt, but something close. A slight unease, maybe. A weird nervousness that I tried to bury under a smirk and some well-timed mockery. Daniel had invited us. My husband, his brother, thought it was a good idea. Family should stay connected, he said. And their father had insisted we come. It had been years after all. The past should stay in the past. Fine. I could play nice for a day. I had nothing to be ashamed of. When the front door opened and he stepped inside, I saw it right away. Nothing had changed. He was still the same. The same slightly awkward posture. The same quiet intensity behind his eyes. The same stubborn refusal to move on. If I expected him to come in with a new wife on his arm, or at least some beautiful woman who made me feel like I had lost something great, I was sorely disappointed. He was still alone. I couldn't stop myself. The words tumbled from my lips like venom wrapped in silk. Hey, ugly. Still the same. His eyes flickered, but he didn't respond. Maybe that should have made me nervous, but I just laughed and leaned against my husband, feeling his warmth beside me. We had one. Years ago we had one. And then my husband, his brother, had to go and open his stupid mouth. Still single? LOL. It was childish even for him, but it felt good. Felt right. Like the natural order of things had been restored. We were together and he was alone. It had been years, but the wound was still there, fresh and raw. And why wouldn't it be? I had made my choice, and my choice hadn't been him. I expected him to say something back. Maybe lash out, maybe scoff and roll his eyes. Something. Anything. But he just stood there staring at their father. And that's when it happened. Daniel, their father, who had been sitting silently at the head of the table, stood up, his old, weathered hands pressing against the table as he rose. His face was unreadable, but his eyes, those sharp, knowing eyes, swept over me and my husband with something that felt uncomfortably close to pity. Good timing, he said, his voice steady. I have something important to tell you. Something shifted in the air. It was a feeling I couldn't quite place, but it made my stomach twist into something cold and unfamiliar. I turned to look at my husband, expecting him to laugh it off, to brush it aside. But he didn't. His grip on my waist loosened, his shoulders tensed, and I watched as the smirk he had worn so confidently just moments ago drained from his face. Then I felt it too. A cold hand around my throat, invisible but suffocating. I looked back at Daniel, suddenly desperate to understand. And that's when I realized whatever was coming next wasn't going to be good. For the first time in 4 years I felt something new. Feared that I don't know what I expected Daniel to say. Maybe some long-winded lecture about family, some emotional nonsense about how my husband and his brother should reconcile. But when I saw the way his fingers curled against the table, his knuckles turning white, I knew this was something else. Sit down, he said. Not a request. A command. My husband stiffened beside me, his bravado cracking just slightly. What's this about, Dad? He asked, his voice still carrying that cocky, careless tone. Daniel's gaze flicked between the two of us. He took his time, and the silence felt unbearable. Then finally his lips pressed into a thin line. It's about your mother. I felt my husband exhale sharply beside me. What about her? Daniel sighed, rubbing his temple as if the weight of the words he was about to say were physically painful. She left something behind before she passed. I resisted the urge to scoff. And Daniel's eyes found mine. And there it was again, that pity. I clenched my jaw. I hated that look. And you too might want to hear what it is. My ex, the man I left behind, hadn't moved since the moment he walked in. He stood like a statue, unreadable, distant, as if he had already known this moment was coming. Let's sit, he finally said. I wanted to protest. Something about the tension in the air, the way my husband had gone quiet, the way Daniel looked at us, it made my skin crawl. But for the first time since walking into this house, I felt like maybe we weren't in control of the situation at all. So we sat. Daniel reached into a drawer, pulling out an old envelope. It was worn at the edges, its once white paper yellowed with age. He placed it on the table and pushed it toward my husband. "Open it." My husband hesitated, but eventually he reached for it. He pulled the letter out, unfolded it and started reading. His eyes moved slowly across the page. First there was confusion, then something else. Something I had never seen in him before. His hand started shaking. "What is this?" His voice barely rose above a whisper. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. "The truth." My patience snapped. "Enough with the dramatics. What does it say?" I reached over and snatched the paper from my husband's hands before he could stop me. And then I read it. The words didn't register at first. I had to read them twice. 3 times. I blinked, my breath hitching in my throat. "No. That's not possible." My husband shot up from his chair, his voice hoarse. "This is a lie." Daniel didn't flinch. "I wish it was." I stared at the letter, my mind racing. This had to be a mistake. It had to be. Because if it wasn't, then everything, our entire marriage, our past, our present, was built on something so sickeningly twisted that I could hardly breathe. My vision blurred as I read the last line again. The words hammering into me like a physical blow. "He's not your father." My husband staggered back as if someone had punched him. "Dad." His voice broke on the word. "I'm not your father," Daniel repeated softly. And suddenly I understood why he had that look of pity in his eyes. Because he knew. He knew what this meant. And it was far worse than anything I could have ever imagined. My husband's breath came in short, ragged gasps. His face had gone completely pale, his lips slightly parted, as if he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. What the hell are you saying?" he finally managed to choke out. Daniel didn't answer right away. He just sat there watching his son, no, not his son, grapple with the truth. I could feel my own heartbeat pounding violently against my ribcage. My hands clenched the letter so tightly that the edges crumpled beneath my fingers. "This has to be some kind of mistake," I muttered. "Some kind of sick joke. You raised him, Daniel. How could he not be?" "I raised him because I thought he was mine," Daniel cut me off, his voice unnervingly steady. "But your mother, she had secrets." A thick, suffocating silence filled the room. My husband, or the man I thought I knew, shook his head violently. No, I don't believe this. This is insane." I could feel his panic, his desperation. And for the first time in my life, I saw him not as the cocky, arrogant man I had fallen for, but as someone completely lost. "Who?" His voice was barely more than a whisper now. His knuckles were white as he clutched the edge of the table. If he's not my father, then who is?" Daniel sighed, running a hand down his face. He suddenly looked so much older, so much more tired than I had ever seen him. "I don't know," he admitted. "She never told me. I only found out after she passed. I found the letters, old correspondence with someone she had been involved with before we were married. She never said his name. Just that he wasn't me." I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. "This doesn't change anything," I blurted, my voice sharper than I intended. They both looked at me. "What?" my husband snapped. "I mean, yes, okay, this is shocking, but it doesn't change the fact that Daniel raised you, that you grew up as his son. Blood doesn't define family." It was a pathetic attempt at rationalizing, but I needed to say it. I needed to believe that this didn't change everything. Because if it did, if this was really as devastating as it felt, then that meant the foundation of everything I had built my life around, choosing him, leaving his brother, carving out a future with him, was standing on nothing but sand. And I wasn't ready to accept that. But my husband wasn't listening to me. "My whole life has been a lie," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. He let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "No wonder he always hated me." I flinched. He didn't say who, but I didn't need him to. We both turned then, almost in unison, toward the man who had been silent this whole time. My ex-husband. The man I left. He was still standing there, still watching. And for the first time since he walked through that door, I saw it. He knew. Maybe not the specifics. Maybe not the full truth. But something in his face told me that somewhere deep down he had always known. And worst of all, He wasn't shocked. He wasn't even surprised. He was just waiting. Like he had known this moment was coming all along. You knew, my husband spat suddenly, his voice shaking with barely restrained rage. Didn't you? You always knew. My ex didn't say anything. But he didn't deny it either. The floor beneath me felt unsteady. My head swam with too many thoughts, too many realizations hitting me all at once. This wasn't just a family scandal. This was a revelation that changed everything. Because if Daniel wasn't his father, then that meant the rivalry, the hatred, the competition between these two brothers wasn't between brothers at all. They weren't even related. I looked between them, feeling the sick, creeping weight of dread settle into my bones. Everything had just collapsed. And in the rubble I realized something else. My husband had just lost his identity, his place, his entire sense of self. And that meant that the marriage I had fought so hard for, the life I had abandoned everything else to build, it might not survive this at all. My husband's breathing was ragged, his fingers gripping the edge of the table so hard I thought the wood might splinter beneath them. His entire body was rigid, his face locked in an expression I couldn't quite place. Rage, shock, grief? Maybe all of them at once. Say something, he barked at his brother. No, not his brother. Not anymore. Still my ex-husband said nothing. He just stood there, arms crossed over his chest, watching the unraveling with that maddening, infuriating calm. You always knew, didn't you? My husband's voice was shaking now. That's why you always acted like you were better than me. That's why you never treated me like a real brother. Because I wasn't. For a moment I thought my ex still wouldn't respond. But then slowly, he let out a breath and met his gaze. I suspected, he admitted, his voice steady. But I didn't know for sure. My husband let out a bitter, humorless laugh. You suspected? Of course. Of course you did. He turned to Daniel, his eyes burning. And you? How long have you known? For years, Daniel said, not bothering to sugarcoat it. Since your mother passed. I found the letters then. And you didn't tell me? I wanted to, Daniel admitted. But what good would it have done? You were already gone already? He stopped himself, glancing at me before shaking his head. I thought it was better left alone. Better left alone? My husband repeated the words like they were poison in his mouth. He ran a shaking hand through his hair, his whole body vibrating with tension. You let me live a lie for my entire life. You let me believe I was part of this family. That I was your son, that... He choked on the words, his throat working as he swallowed the overwhelming emotions threatening to consume him. Daniel didn't argue. He just sighed, shoulders heavy, as if carrying the weight of a decision he had already regretted for years. I raised you like you were mine, he finally said. Because to me you were. I could see the words hit my husband like a gut punch, but he wasn't ready to accept them. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I swallowed hard, trying to force some sense of order back into this chaos. This doesn't change anything, I said quickly, before I could even think it through. My husband's head snapped toward me. Are you insane? His voice was sharp, cutting. Everything just changed. No, I pressed, shaking my head, my heartbeat rattling in my chest. Yes, okay, this is shocking, but you're still the same person. We're still the same people. We still have our life. Our marriage. This doesn't undo that. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Because I saw it in his face. Something had cracked inside him. Something deep, something fundamental. You don't get it, he muttered, mostly to himself. His hands trembled as he clenched them into fists, his whole body shaking with an anger too big to contain. I have spent my entire life trying to prove myself. To him. He shot a hateful glare at my ex. To you. He turned on Daniel. To everyone. And for what? For nothing. Because none of it was real. That's not true, I tried. Oh, shut up, Olivia. His words hit like a slap. The room fell silent. I felt my face heat, a sharp sting rising in my chest. He had never spoken to me like that before. Ever. I turned to my ex-husband, my last source of stability in this spiraling disaster, expecting him to jump in, to defend me, to do something. But he just stood there, watching, like he had expected this. You're losing it, my ex finally said. His voice low, calm, infuriatingly detached. You need to sit down and think. Don't you dare act like you have all the answers, my husband snapped. You have always wanted me to fail, haven't you? Well, congratulations. You win. I saw my ex's jaw tighten, a flicker of something dark behind his eyes, but he still didn't rise to the bait. My husband turned back to Daniel. And you? He said, his voice colder now, more controlled but somehow worse that way. If you're not my father, then I don't owe you a damn thing. You're nothing to me. Daniel's face barely changed, but I saw something tighten around his eyes. A sadness, maybe. A grief he wasn't allowing himself to show. My husband shoved the chair back, making it scrape against the floor as he stood. I'm done here, he muttered, running a hand through his hair, his chest rising and falling like he was struggling to breathe. I can't be here right now. I reached out, grabbing his arm before he could storm off. Wait, you're just leaving? Where are you going? He wrenched his arm away from me, his eyes blazing. I don't know, Olivia. But I sure as hell don't need to be around them right now. And with that, he turned and stormed out of the house. I sat there, stunned, my breath caught in my throat, my whole body feeling suddenly cold. Because for the first time since choosing him over his brother, since walking away from the life I had before, I wasn't sure if he was coming back. The front door slammed shut behind my husband, rattling the picture frames on the walls. I flinched at the sound, my breath coming in short, uneven bursts. He'll be back, I muttered, mostly to myself. Neither Daniel nor my ex-husband said anything. I glanced at my ex, hoping to see some reaction on his face, some hint of satisfaction or even concern. But he just stood there, his face unreadable, his arms still crossed over his chest. Well, I snapped, my frustration boiling over. Aren't you going to say something? What do you want me to say? His voice was calm, measured. I don't know, I hissed. Something. Anything. He tilted his head slightly, studying me in a way that made my skin prickle. He's not handling this well. That much is obvious. Of course, he's not handling this well. I shot back. His whole life just fell apart. No, my ex corrected, his voice unnervingly soft. Your life just fell apart. His words stopped me cold. I felt my pulse hammering at my temples, my mouth suddenly dry. What the hell is that supposed to mean? He didn't answer. But I knew. I knew exactly what he meant. And I hated him for it. Daniel let out a long, tired sigh. Go after him, Olivia. He needs you right now. I scoffed. Oh, now you care? After keeping this secret for years, now you suddenly give a damn. I always cared, Daniel said quietly. I just didn't know how to fix something this broken. I clenched my jaw, shaking my head. No, this wasn't how this was supposed to go. I had one. 4 years ago, I walked away from my old life because I wanted this. Him. I chose my husband over my ex, over this family, because I believed in us. Because we had something stronger. I refused to believe it had all been for nothing. Without another word, I turned and stormed out after him. The night air was crisp against my skin as I stepped onto the porch. My husband was already halfway down the driveway, his fists clenched at his sides, his entire body taut like a wire about to snap. Wait, I called. He didn't stop. I rushed after him, grabbing his arm. He wrenched free, spinning to face me with wild, furious eyes. What? He barked. I recoiled slightly, caught off guard by the raw anger in his voice. You can't just leave like this. Why not? He let out a bitter laugh, running a shaking hand through his hair. Tell me, Olivia, why the hell should I stay? What do I even have left here? I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. Everything I thought was mine, everything I thought I was a goddamn lie, he continued, his voice shaking. I don't belong here. I don't even know who I am anymore. You're still you, I tried. You're still my husband. That hasn't changed. He let out another sharp, humorless laugh. Hasn't it? I swallowed hard. Please, let's just go home and talk. Home. He shook his head. Is that even real? Or was that just another lie I told myself? You're being ridiculous. I snapped, my patience wearing thin. Am I? He took a step closer, his eyes locked onto mine. Then tell me something, Olivia, if you had known. If you had known I wasn't his son, that I wasn't who I thought I was, would you have still chosen me? I froze. My stomach twisted violently, a lump forming in my throat. What kind of question is that? I forced out. A simple one, he said coldly. Would you have still left him for me? I wanted to scream yes. I wanted to say it without hesitation, without that awful guilty pause that was stretching between us like a canyon. But I didn't, because the truth, the one I couldn't admit, not even to myself, was already sitting in the pit of my stomach like a heavy stone. I didn't know. I didn't know. And that hesitation, that single moment of silence, was all he needed. His expression twisted into something between heartbreak and rage. That's what I thought, he muttered. Wait. I reached for him, but he was already stepping back. I need time, he said, shaking his head. I need to think. So that's it. My voice cracked slightly. You're just going to walk away? After everything? I don't know what else to do, he admitted. I just know I can't be here right now. And then he turned. He walked away. And this time I didn't follow. I just stood there frozen, watching as the life I had built, the man I had risked everything for, disappeared into the night. And for the first time since making my choice all those years ago, I felt like maybe I had made the wrong one. I don't know how long I stood there. The night air pressed against my skin, but I felt nothing. The weight of everything that had just happened crushed me into the ground, but I couldn't move. I had always thought I was in control, that the choices I made were the right ones, that no matter what, I would come out ahead. But now my husband, the man I left everything for, was gone. Not just left the house, gone. Gone. I turned back toward the house, my body moving on autopilot. I wasn't ready to face them again. Daniel with his quiet, exhausted disappointment, and my ex-husband with his unbearable, knowing silence. But I had nowhere else to go. As I stepped back inside, I found them exactly where I left them. Daniel was seated at the table. Rubbing his temple like this was giving him a headache he couldn't shake. My ex still stood near the doorway, arms crossed, his face unreadable. His eyes flicked to me, scanning my face. He left, I said, my voice hollow. Daniel let out a tired sigh. I figured he would. He just needs time, I added quickly, as if saying it out loud would make it true. No one responded. I exhaled sharply, dropping into a chair at the dining table, gripping my forehead with both hands. This wasn't supposed to happen, I muttered. What was supposed to happen, Olivia? I looked up. My ex-husband's voice was quiet, but it carried weight. What? I snapped. What exactly did you think would happen? His expression didn't change, but there was something behind his eyes that made my stomach twist. That you could just take him, build a life with him, and everything would be fine? That the choices you made wouldn't have consequences? Oh, shut up, I spat. Don't you dare stand there acting like you're some wise, all-knowing saint. You didn't even fight for me. His jaw twitched slightly. Fight for you? His voice was lower now, quieter. You wanted me to fight for you? I knew I had hit a nerve, but I didn't care. Yes. I exploded, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. You just let me go. You just stood there and watched me leave. If you really loved me, you would have tried. The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel glanced between us but said nothing. My ex took a slow, deep breath, then stepped forward, placing his hands on the table as he leaned in slightly. Olivia, he said, his voice dangerously calm. You didn't want me to fight for you. You wanted me to chase you, to beg, to grovel. But I'm not that kind of man. And you knew that. I opened my mouth, but he didn't let me speak. I did love you, he continued, his eyes burning into mine. And if you had asked me to fight for you, I would have. But you didn't. You made your choice. You chose him. And now. He let out a short, bitter chuckle. Now you're realizing what that choice actually cost you. I hated him in that moment. Not because he was wrong, but because he was right. I don't regret my choices, I said through clenched teeth, even as my chest tightened. Good, he replied, standing up straight again. Then don't start now. Daniel sighed again, rubbing his forehead. Enough. This isn't helping anything. I ignored him, glaring at my ex. Don't act like you're above this. You wanted this to happen, didn't you? You wanted him to fall apart. You wanted me to suffer for leaving you. No, he said, and this time there was no malice in his voice, just something eerily close to pity. I didn't want that. But I knew it was inevitable. I shook my head, my vision blurring slightly. You're enjoying this, aren't you? He didn't answer. And that was enough of an answer. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. You're unbelievable, I spat. I should never have come here. We never should have come here. Maybe, he said simply. I turned to Daniel. You had years to tell him. Years. And you chose now. Daniel met my gaze, weary but unwavering. He deserved the truth, no matter how painful it was. No, he didn't, I said, my voice breaking slightly. Not like this. I stormed toward the door, needing space, needing air. But as I reached for the handle, I hesitated. As if I left now, where would I go? My husband wasn't home. He didn't have a home right now. And that meant neither did I. I turned my head slightly, glancing back at my ex. If you hate me so much, why even let us come here? He was quiet for a long time. Then finally he spoke. Because I wanted to see how this story ended. A chill ran down my spine. Because I suddenly had the horrible, sinking feeling that it wasn't over yet. I stepped outside, the night air wrapping around me like a cold warning. The silence of the neighborhood felt suffocating, pressing in from all sides. I wanted to believe this was temporary, that my husband just needed space, that this wasn't the end. But something gnawed at me. A hollow, sick feeling that told me I had just witnessed the beginning of something I couldn't stop. I pulled out my phone and dialed his number. It rang. And rang. And rang. Voicemail. I cursed under my breath, shoving the phone back into my pocket. He wouldn't answer. Not now. Maybe not ever. I had to find him. I spent the next 2 hours driving aimlessly, checking every place I thought he might go. His favorite bar. The park where he used to clear his head after work. Even the damn gym, though I knew he wouldn't be in the right state of mind to work out. Nothing. The fear began creeping in, slow at first, then all at once. What if he wasn't just gone for the night? What if this was it? No, I wouldn't let my mind go there. My phone buzzed. I snatched it up so quickly that I almost dropped it, my breath catching in my throat. But it wasn't him. It was my ex. I almost ignored it. Almost threw the phone onto the passenger seat and pretended I hadn't seen it. But something inside me, the same twisted curiosity that had driven me here in the first place, made me answer. What? I snapped. He was just here. My stomach flipped. What? Where? He came back to the house about 10 minutes ago, he said, his voice calm, measured. He wasn't looking for you. The words hit like a slap. Then why? I asked, barely able to breathe. He wanted answers. My pulse thundered in my ears. What did you tell him? The truth, my ex said simply. I didn't like the way he said it, like he had just calmly set fire to everything and watched it burn. What the hell does that mean? It means, he said, that your husband is having a very long, very overdue identity crisis. And for once, I'm not the one to blame. His words made my skin prickle. Where is he now? Gone, my ex replied. Again. I gritted my teeth. You could have stopped him, I accused. He let out a short, bitter laugh. And say what, Olivia? That everything's fine? That he should go home and pretend none of this matters? He exhaled sharply. You don't get it. He's not coming back to the life you had before. He's not the same person anymore. And that means you aren't either. I hated the finality in his voice. I can fix this, I said, more to myself than to him. No, he said. You can't. I hung up before he could say anything else, because I refused to believe it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in our apartment staring at the front door, waiting for it to open. It never did. At 4:27 a.m. I finally broke. I called him again. Voicemail. Again. And again. By 7 a.m., exhaustion and panic had settled into my bones. I needed to find him. I needed to understand what he was thinking, because if I didn't, I was afraid I was about to lose everything. At 9:15 a.m. my phone rang. I nearly dropped it in my scramble to answer. Where the hell are you? I demanded before he could say a word. Silence. Say something, damn it. His voice came through quiet, distant. I need time. I gritted my teeth. You've had time. Not enough. A cold, sick feeling wrapped around me. Are you coming back? Another long pause. I don't know. That was it. That was all it took. The panic that had been swirling beneath my skin burst open. Pure, undiluted rage bubbling up in its place. You don't know. I hissed. Are you kidding me? After everything? After all the hell we went through to be together? You're seriously just going to walk away? I don't know who I am, Olivia. His voice cracked slightly. I don't know if I've ever known. You're my husband. I snapped, my vision blurring with tears. Am I? The way he said it made my blood run cold. Of course you are. Then why does it feel like my whole life was built on someone else's lie? I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. And what about us? Was that a lie too? He was quiet for so long that I thought he had hung up. And then finally he spoke. I don't know. My stomach twisted violently. So that's it? You're just going to disappear? Leave me like this? I don't have any answers for you, Olivia, he said, his voice hollow. I don't even have them for myself. Tears burned at my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. So what am I supposed to do? I whispered. I don't know, he admitted. But I think it's time you figured that out without me. And then, before I could say another word, the line went dead. I don't remember dropping my phone. I don't remember when I started shaking. All I remember is staring at the blank screen, my heart hammering against my ribs, my throat raw with the words I never got to say. He was gone. Just like that. And for the first time since I made my choice all those years ago, since I left my ex, since I threw everything into this one man, this one life, I realized that I had gambled everything. And I had lost. The silence in the apartment was unbearable. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the weight of it. The suffocating realization that I was alone. I sat there still gripping my phone, staring at the dead screen like I could will it to ring again. Like I could make him come back. But he wouldn't. I had heard it in his voice, in the empty, hollow way he said my name. I don't know who I am. He wasn't coming back. Not to me. Not to us. I spent the next few hours in a daze. I barely remember moving. Barely remember walking to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face just to feel something. I looked at my reflection, messy hair, swollen eyes, dark circles under them. I looked small. Weak. I hated it. This wasn't who I was supposed to be. I had won. I had fought for this life for him and I had gotten what I wanted. So why did it feel like I was the one who had lost everything? The first person to call me wasn't my husband. It was Daniel. I ignored it the first time. The second time. By the third I picked up. What? My voice was hoarse, raw. Come back to the house. I let out a sharp, bitter laugh. Why? So you and your perfect son can watch me fall apart. Olivia. His voice was calm, steady, like he had already expected this reaction. You don't have to do this alone. I'm not alone, I snapped. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. We both knew that wasn't true. I didn't want to go back. I hated the idea of walking into that house facing them, facing him, my ex. But I had nowhere else to go. So an hour later I found myself standing on Daniel's front porch, my hands clenched into fists, my heart hammering. I didn't knock. I just walked in. They were waiting for me in the living room. Daniel sat in his usual chair, a cup of coffee in his hands, watching me with that unreadable expression he always wore when he had something to say but wasn't sure how to say it. My ex stood by the fireplace, arms crossed, looking as infuriatingly calm as ever. I refused to look at him. Where is he? I demanded. Daniel sighed. I don't know. That's bullshit. He doesn't want to be found, Olivia. I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. So that's it? We just let him walk away. What else can we do? I turned then, finally meeting my ex-husband's eyes. You could fix this. A flicker of something passed over his face, surprise maybe. Fix it, he repeated, like he hadn't expected me to say that. You wanted this to happen, I accused, stepping closer. Don't act like you didn't. You've been waiting for this moment for years, waiting for me to suffer, waiting for him to crack. So congratulations. You got what you wanted. You think I wanted him to lose everything? My ex's voice was sharp now, cutting. That I wanted to see him spiral like this? Believe it or not, Olivia, not everything is about you. Screw you. No, he shot back, stepping forward. Screw you. You chose this. You chose him. And now that he's falling apart, you're looking at me like I can somehow fix it? I can't. And even if I could, why the hell would I? His words hit harder than I expected. I swallowed, forcing myself to hold his gaze. Because you still love me, I whispered. The room went still. I saw something flicker in his expression, something deep, something I had counted on. I knew I was right. And for a split second I almost felt victorious. But then, I don't, he said. I blinked. What? I don't love you, Olivia. His voice was steady, unshaking. Not anymore. My breath caught in my throat. That's a lie. No. He exhaled, shaking his head. It's not. Maybe I did once. Maybe I would have done anything for you. But not anymore. Not after everything. The weight of those words crushed me. You're lying, I said again, but it sounded weaker this time. I'm not, he said simply. You wanted me to fight for you. I didn't. You wanted me to chase you. I wouldn't. And now you want me to save your marriage? I won't. I couldn't breathe. I felt the walls closing in, the foundation I had been standing on cracking beneath me. He wasn't supposed to say that. He was supposed to still love me, even after everything. I don't need your help anyway, I hissed, shoving past him. He didn't stop me. Daniel didn't either. I stormed outside, gasping for air, feeling the weight of something I had never truly felt before. For years I had believed I had won, that I had gotten what I wanted, that I had built a better life. But now, standing there on that front porch, I finally realized I hadn't won. I had lost. Everything. I drove aimlessly for hours. There was nowhere to go, no one left to turn to. My husband was gone. My ex wanted nothing to do with me. And Daniel, he was just done. I had spent so many years believing I was in control, that my choices had put me ahead. But I wasn't ahead. I was alone. And I had done this to myself. It wasn't until the gas light in my car blinked on that I finally realized how long I had been driving. The sun was beginning to set, the sky painted in deep shades of orange and red. I pulled into an empty gas station, stepping out of the car with shaky hands. As I filled the tank, I stared at my reflection in the car window. I looked hollow, like a ghost of the person I used to be. And maybe that was fitting, because everything I had built was gone. By the time I finally got home, it was dark. I stepped into the apartment half expecting, hoping, to see my husband sitting on the couch waiting for me. But the apartment was empty, silent, cold. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe as I made my way inside. The place felt foreign now, like it wasn't mine anymore, like it had never been. His things were still here. His jacket hanging by the door, his shoes by the entryway. But I knew. He wasn't coming back. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. The next few days blurred together. I didn't sleep. I barely ate. I kept calling him, but it always went to voicemail. I tried his friends, none of them had seen him. I tried his work, he hadn't shown up. It was like he had disappeared completely. And every day that passed, the panic in my chest grew stronger. He wasn't just taking space. He was gone. On the 5th day I finally broke. I went back to Daniel's house. Back to him. I didn't want to. I hated that I had to. But I had no choice. Because my husband was missing. And the only person who could help me find him was the man I had left behind. Daniel wasn't home when I arrived. But my ex was. I found him sitting on the back porch, a beer in his hand, watching the sunset like he didn't have a single care in the world. The sight of him, so calm, so unaffected, made something inside me snap. You knew this would happen, didn't you? I accused. He took a slow sip of his beer before turning to look at me. What exactly are you blaming me for now? You didn't even try to help him, I hissed. You just stood there and watched him fall apart. He wasn't mine to save, Olivia, he said simply. The words hit like a slap. He was your brother. No, he corrected, his voice eerily calm. He wasn't. I felt my stomach twist. You didn't even care, did you? I accused. You wanted this. You wanted me to lose him. You wanted me to suffer. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Olivia, do you ever stop and think that maybe, just maybe not everything that's happened is about you? I clenched my jaw, my nails digging into my palms. You're enjoying this. I'm not. He met my gaze then, his eyes dark and unreadable. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't see it coming. I hated him. I hated that he was so calm, that he wasn't hurting the way I was, that he had moved on while I was standing in the ruins of everything I had built. So what now? I whispered. What am I supposed to do? He exhaled, shaking his head. That's not my problem anymore, Olivia. Tears burned at my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. He's gone, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know where he is. I don't know if he's okay. And you're just going to stand there and act like you don't care. He was silent for a long time. Then finally he set his beer down and stood up. You should go home, Olivia. And if he never comes back? I asked, my voice cracking. He didn't answer. And that was answer enough. That night, I went home and stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. She looked tired, defeated, broken. And for the first time since this all started, I realized I wasn't waiting for my husband to come back. I was waiting for the moment when I finally accepted that he never would. Days turned into weeks, and still no sign of him. No calls, no texts, no messages saying he just needed time. He had vanished. At first, I told myself he'd come back when he calmed down, that he just needed space to process everything, to figure things out. But the longer he stayed gone, the more I started to accept the truth. He wasn't coming back. Not to me. Not to us. One night I sat on the couch, staring at the framed wedding photo on the shelf. We had looked so happy that day. I had been so sure of my choices. I had left my ex behind, believing my husband was the better option, believing that what we had was real, stronger. And now? I was alone. Not just physically. Truly, completely alone. A month after he left, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered, my heart pounding. Olivia. I froze. Daniel. There was a pause on the other end. He reached out to me, Daniel said. I nearly dropped the phone. Where is he? I gasped. He's not coming back, Olivia. The words hit me like a knife to the chest. Where is he? I demanded again. He didn't tell me, Daniel admitted. But he wanted me to know he was okay. He said he's moving on. He needs to start over. I shook my head violently, gripping the phone so tight my knuckles turned white. This isn't fair, I whispered. He doesn't get to just leave like this. Daniel sighed. He didn't just leave, Olivia. You pushed him away long before that night. I shut my eyes, my chest aching. I loved him. Maybe, Daniel said softly. But you never chose him for the right reasons. My throat tightened. And what the hell does that mean? It means, Daniel said, that you didn't pick him because you loved him more. You picked him because you wanted to win. Tears burned in my eyes. That's not true. Isn't it? I couldn't answer. Because deep down I knew the truth. I had wanted something better, something more exciting, something that felt like winning. I had thought leaving my ex for his brother was winning. But in the end I had lost everything. Goodbye, Olivia, Daniel said quietly. The line went dead. I stood there, gripping the phone, my whole body trembling. That night I took down the wedding photo from the shelf. I stared at it for a long time. Then with a deep breath, I placed it face down in a drawer. Because there was nothing left to fight for. Nothing left to hold on to. And for the first time I let myself accept it. I had made my choice. And I would spend the rest of my life living with it. The end.